Thank you, and I know we have varying degrees of familiarity with the whole Constitutional Convention process in this room, from those of us who've been living and breathing it inside out for 12 years to those of us who are relatively new. But I have taught constitutional law at various times, so I can't resist. When our founding fathers created Article 5, they put in the two different mechanisms. When they were creating this nation, they had no idea if it was going to work out, right? Nothing like this had ever existed before. And they thought, well, we're coming up with this idea. We think it's pretty good. We think it'll work, but who knows? It might all go to hell in a handbucket. We got to provide people mechanisms to fix things. So they created two mechanisms. One was the kind of tinker around the edges, where you have a really specific change, say give women the right to vote or end slavery, or a specific thing that you have in black and white and everybody sees it and they vote on that, up or down. And then they created another one, which is if everything just doesn't work out at all and we got to go back to the drawing board and write a whole new constitution and break the emergency glass, that's what this is. That's the whole new convention. We're just going to call it 1787 all over again and open it all up. And I know that in the introductory remarks, there was talks like, oh, don't worry, this is just a really limited thing. This will just be for a really limited cause. Folks, I really urge you to read all of the quotes on my handout, because there ain't no such thing. There is no such thing as a limited constitutional convention. It may be what we intend, it might be what we want, it might be what we hope would happen, but it has zero legal effect. It is as legally binding as a $3 bill. And if you go through this, legal scholars from across the entire political spectrum are in largely agreement on this. We got 3 Supreme Court justices, including a Supreme Court Chief Justice, 2 Solicitors General, law professors from the top law schools across the country, including my own constitutional law professors on there. They are all in pretty solid agreement that once you gavel in that constitutional convention, it is open season. Open season. We might say we only want you to talk about a balanced budget amendment, or we only want you to talk about term limits, or whatever it is. But once they're in there, they can get rid of the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Second Amendment. They can do anything they want to our Constitution. And I know I keep hearing, oh, but don't worry, because at the end of the day, it'll come back to us and we will have the final say. We get to ratify. I know that was in the opening remarks. Not true, folks. Not true. When they get in there to rewrite the Constitution, they can rewrite the ratification provision as well. In fact, there's precedent for this. That is exactly what they did in 1787, and I think you know your history on this. They were convened for a single subject. They were convened for a single purpose in 1787. The only thing they were supposedly allowed to discuss was ratification of the Articles of Confederation. And they got in there and they gavelled in and said, just kidding, let's write a whole new constitution. So the only precedent we have was a runaway convention. But beyond that, they also changed the ratification provision. So in the Articles of Confederation, it required unanimous ratification. They said, that's too hard. Let's change it. Let's say it's just 3/4. There's nothing to stop a new constitutional convention from changing it again. They could change it to 50%. They could change it to 1/3. They could do anything they want. They could say it doesn't need ratification. So you really should not have comfort in thinking there's this safety net of ratification. There is not. Once we enter that constitutional convention, it is open season, including on the ratification provision. And I also would direct your attention to the language of Article 5 of the Constitution, which provides 2 mechanisms for ratification. Doesn't have to come back to us, folks. It doesn't have to go through legislatures. That's just one of the ways that you can ratify. The other option is it can go through a convention. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says how a convention has to be constituted. It could be the governor's 3 best friends. It could be he could convene a convention, or who knows who convenes the convention. And again, there's some history on this too. I believe there's the 21st Amendment when they repealed prohibition. Passed unanimously in Utah. Seems odd, right? A lot of non-drinkers in Utah. Seems odd that they would unanimously ratify the repeal of prohibition. It was through a convention where the people they wanted that were going to vote a certain way were the ones chosen to be at the convention. A convention for ratification can absolutely be rigged, folks. So there is nothing that should give you any comfort that this thing won't go off the rails, because it very much can. Now, I've heard also talk that, oh, don't worry, but we don't want an actual convention. We just want to get them nervous. We just want them to get them shaking in their little boots so that they go and do it themselves. But that's not what we're doing here, folks. That might be what's in your mind and in your heart, but that's not what the language of this thing says or does. This is a legally binding call for a constitutional convention. Doesn't matter what we think. Doesn't matter if we hope that they chicken out and do it themselves. Once this thing's on the books and we call for a constitutional convention, they're supposed to call one when they get to 34. And you know, What if they call our bluff? It's like we're pulling the pin on a grenade here and saying, like, well, I'm sure someone will disarm it before it goes off. I'm sure they won't really want the grenade to go off. What if it does? Is this a responsible way to be conducting ourselves with our most precious founding document? There's no reason to think that somebody's going to save us from setting this horrible wheel in motion. And I just think it's not responsible to go down this path. Now, I've heard people say, well, it's not really going to happen. It's not really a big risk. Well, they taught me in law school, you measure risk by taking the probability of something happening times the magnitude of the loss, P times L. Well, the probability, maybe it's low. I don't actually know that it's as low as you think it is. But the magnitude of the loss is staggering. It is unimaginable. It is the destruction of our precious, sacred founding document that we count on for the greatest nation on earth. So even if the probability is 0.0001%, that is too high when you are multiplying it by the magnitude of the loss we're talking about. But I actually don't think the likelihood is as low as you think. If you look at the amount of money and lobbying effort that has been thrown at this state to get this thing through, right after we killed it pretty solidly last year, somebody thinks this is pretty darn important and has a shot of happening. They would not be putting the kind of money and effort into Idaho if it were just a symbolic, let's just shake our fists and say we're mad at Congress. Somebody thinks this is really going somewhere. And they're not wrong on that, because 33 states have an active call for a convention on the books. And the Constitution doesn't say you can't aggregate those across different subject matters. So if you have 10 states that want a constitutional convention for term limits and 23 that want one for a balanced budget, you can put those together. And those count, because they're just a call for constitutional convention. You can put those together to get toward your 34. We could be the 34th state, people. That's why we're being flooded with money and lobbyists. Because we could be the one that pushes it over. This isn't a throwaway vote, folks. This isn't some pie-in-the-sky distant possibility. This could actually happen, and we could be the ones on whose shoulders it rests as to whether our Constitution remains inviolate. So please take this vote really seriously. I know this could have implications for your elections, and I understand that, and that's all important. But I would just say, what are we saving it for? I mean, what are we saving it for? What's more important than preserving our Constitution? I sure can't think of anything. Because, I understand the debt is bad. The debt is terrible. The debt is potentially catastrophic. But it is not as catastrophic as what could emerge from a constitutional convention. That is really the asteroid heading towards Earth. And I hope that you will reach in your hearts and your consciences and not let this happen. I spoke last year on this subject about how our country is deeply fractured right now. We agree on almost nothing. I think the one thing that everybody in this room agrees on is that our Constitution is an inspired, sacred document that we would lay down our lives for. That is the one glue that holds us together as Americans, and I think it's incumbent on us to preserve that with everything that we've got. We're almost at 250 years, folks. Let's not blow it now. Let's make it across the finish line, and I hope you will give this your red light.